Have you guys ever participated in anything like this yourselves? Yes.
Yes.
What did you think of this survey this year?
Well, one of the things that was interesting for me especially was class size and how it's something that we work with immediately every day. So we see it every single day. Some of the other questions were less direct, but it has a direct impact on our teaching and how much time we can give to every student. So that's been something that's been discussed for a while, and it's still at the forefront of concerns in education.
Mm-hmm.
I personally like the survey because I thought it covered a wide range of issues that are of concern to both teachers and students, and therefore our parents. And I think that for looking at the results of the survey, that while they might not be surprising to a lot of educators, I'm really glad that the survey results are being released publicly, because I think it'll raise awareness in the general public, and particularly with our students' parents, about significant issues in education in the state.
Exactly, because, you know, this survey was meant to kind of, you know, open the window and shed some light on what you guys experience. You guys experience and live it every single day. The parents on the other side, we don't really know. So I think, at least for me, and I think a lot of our viewers, this was very eye-opening. If there was one thing that you wanted the parents of your students to know, and this goes for everybody, I'm going to ask everybody this, what do you want them to know from this survey?
I think one of the things that really jumped out to me was the question about mental health, because I'm only a beginning teacher, but the stories that my children have told me, the issues that they're going through, and you know, thoughts of suicide or you know, depression are much more prevalent than I had ever expected. And so without the resources to deal with them in the schools, I want to make sure that parents understand that and can get the kids the services they need.
Okay.
One of the things that I was excited to see in the survey is I've been teaching a long time, and so when I saw how many educators had been 20+ years, and I also saw how many don't plan on leaving the field for at least 10 years. And I think in education we hear so much about teachers just jumping, you know, they're gone, they're gone, they're gone. And I would love parents to see the fact that there are those of us that are so dedicated, and we're in it for the long haul.
And that is a good thing. That is a good thing, that we have that consistency for the students. Yeah. Something else that you would like your parents to really understand from this survey?
I think people in schools is very important, whether it is social workers and school counselors that are necessary to help address the mental health issues that all of our children face, because none of us as educators are mental health professionals. We need more people in our school that have that expertise to help us best meet the needs of students. And I think also the survey results showed that I believe it was half of the teachers in the survey said that there were too many students in our classes individually to help meet the needs. We need more teachers. And it is much easier to provide individualized instruction and differentiation and to meet the needs of our students when we have less students in our class. So class size matters. I think parents need to really understand that, and anything that parents can do to advocate for more adults in our school buildings is only going to benefit kids.
Got it.
I agree with her. I think it comes down to funding our schools. You know, that's the big thing. Fully funding our schools to give us the tools that we need to properly educate and support the students that we have in our classrooms. That's a huge piece. And you know, many of our towns are, you know, residential, and some are, you know, have businesses in them that support the schools a little bit more. But that inequality across districts is really prevalent in places, and funding our schools should be priority #1 for our governor. That's the biggest thing I can say. And if you look at the survey, you look at mental health, you look at class size, you look at somebody even dig deeper into some of the data where younger teachers aren't staying long enough. It all comes down to funding. funding, and funding is probably the biggest key component I took out of all of that.
So that's like the root of it, that
Yeah.
it all starts with the funding, and then we can get the mental health professionals needed. We can then work on getting more teachers to address class sizes, things like that. Got
I
it.
mean, one of the things about class size, just to bring this point home, is so in high school, we teach around a 43-minute period. So if you have a class that has 25 kids in it, you can do the math. So that's approximately, without any introduction, without, that's 43 pure minutes. That would be 1 3/4 minutes per student if I was going to give the student individual attention. So when parents are thinking about, what can you do for my child, a lot of us would like to do many things for the kids, but we're often bound by time constraints.
Got it, okay. Anything else in terms of what parents need to know from this survey, in your minds?
I think they don't realize that everybody's using so much of their own money, regardless if it's an affluent district
Right.
or a district that's in
That's
poverty.
correct,
It's funny because this survey started me having conversations with other people. And
absolutely.
I spoke with a teacher in Darien, and she said, I think the parents might think I don't have to pay for anything. Everything's given to us. She
Right.
goes, but I'm actually bringing my own tissues. And
Yes. Yeah.
I'm bringing my own this and that. And we are Darien, but you're still bringing your own items. And I was kind of shocked at the survey because people are using their own computers at home because there's not a printer at school. I was surprised to see how it broke down in the survey, that it was kind of eye-opening to me.
Right.
Got it. Anything else?
Absolutely, and to go with that, how many teachers have secondary jobs? And some of them, if you look at the data,
Yeah.
some people probably didn't even think of tutoring or teaching summer school as a second job, but in essence, even though they're still teaching and they don't consider it a second job, it's a second job. They're supplementing their income another way. So there's a lot of pieces to the survey that really open our eyes to.
And I think a lot of
Education.
people think we only work during the school year, and we don't work during the summer. But as a special educator, I do work in the summer because my students need the constant. We have to be consistent with them, and it helps help them to be successful. So I think that's another misnomer, that people think we don't work all year long, and we do, because people are either doing curriculum work or they're working in, working on what they're going to work on next year, or they're taking classes. It's ongoing, and I think it's just become such a busy time for all of us
Yes.
that that time constraint is such a big deal.
Yeah.
Also, go ahead.
This is my 37th year, and I have not had one year where all I did was teaching. I've
Oh,
had anywhere
absolutely.
from
Correct.
2 to 3 jobs, just to be able to survive.
And is it all in the educational field?
Are all my jobs?
Yeah.
Well, it's varied over the years. I've done everything from wait tables while I was teaching to factory work. And at this point, I am a church musician on top of teaching. I teach summer school, but I've never had just one job.
And your teacher of the year, too?
I don't know a teacher who's over the lifetime of their career who has not at some point had to have supplemental income to make ends meet in their own personal situations. And for me, as a 20-year veteran, I can think back to what it was like to be an early career educator and a mid-career educator and trying to make ends meet as a younger person with rent and student loans, and then later on trying to work with grad school and family and other things, and to see over the arc of 20 years how that has not changed really at all, and in some situations actually gotten worse for our teachers in the state. I did find that concerning, and I think that the public and parents need to be more aware of the intersection of salary with teachers' time constraints outside of the regular workday.
And I think, a lot of the teacher walkouts and protests in other states where they're working other jobs, I think some people might think it's different in Connecticut, but as you can see, there's still a lot of us working second jobs, and that also, it really takes away from the students because it gives us less opportunity to plan and to prepare for the lessons there.
And while we're on this point, by a show of hands, how many at some point in your careers had to take a second job? Nearly all. Wow.
And and to the point of in other states, for example, we see these teachers walking out and going on strike. Many people don't know that in Connecticut we can't do that. That's against the law. So when we bargain, it's less right for a fair contract. We can't do any of that.
Got it. All right, I want to move on talking about how it's changed, and this goes for the teachers who have been here for more than 20 years. How has it been in the last, I mean, when you compare things 20 years ago to now, what is the environment like?
It's funny. I talked to a group of future educators in the spring. And as I was talking, I said to them, you know, my lesson prep and everything has changed so much because I had to Xerox I didn't have a Xerox, I had a Ditto Master. And I saw a look of confusion. And I said to them, you know, when I prepped my lessons, I had to be so meticulous because you had to write on the carbon. And if you made one mistake, then you started over with a new carbon before you put it on the Ditto machine to then crank it with your arm, you know, to then prepare your lessons for your students. And now we have all this technology. So it's changed a lot in that the methods of creating lessons for students are different. And also what's expected of the teacher is as well. My students that I have now are so technology savvy that if I am not engaging enough as a person, I won't have their attention because they've grown up with so many different things that students before did not have.
Well, I want to ask you that then too, because I mean, since technology is like just pushing forward and that's what a lot of the children are really comfortable with right now, are you guys getting trained on that side to be able to keep up with these trends, to be able, is that part of
I always
what
feel
you
like
guys
I'm
do?
playing catch up. Always playing catch up behind what students know and are able to do with technology. And I think, again, due to budgetary constraints, technology resources don't keep pace in our schools with what's available in the general public. And then to dovetail into another question that you had asked, that just ubiquitous technology that's constantly present brings so many other issues into school that 15 years ago we didn't deal with, and that contributes to school climate, to disciplinary issues, to mental health issues in ways that we never, as an educator, I never thought 10 or 15 years ago that I would be seeing some of the things that I see as a regular basis in my classroom, and a lot of that is technology based.
In terms of what?
I definitely see kids that have more difficulty socializing with each other face to face, that so much of their screen time and communication is through a device that when it comes time to have serious conversations face to face, particularly I see as a teenager, there's in conflict resolution and things like that. Teenagers really struggle with that now in a way that wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago. And kids, I think, are more willing to say things through a text or through social media, a Snapchat, that they would not say face to face, and that people didn't say face to face years ago, but now it's just constantly present. And kids' cell phones going off with all sorts of social media at all hours of the night, so they wake up to a barrage of communication from the media and their peers, and it's constant.
All right. Anything else that anyone wants to touch on in terms of how different things are now than it was back then?
One thing that a veteran colleague said to me was that kids haven't changed, but society has changed. Kids will always be kids, but to Kristen's point, technology wasn't there even when I started teaching 14 years ago. The cell phones are a constant issue in my school. Vaping is an issue. Vaping is a huge health issue. It's a public health issue that I think schools aren't doing enough to address.
Yes.
One thing I'd like to say is I went into a local McDonald's and everything was out. And there were only 2 people who could work the registers. When I worked at McDonald's, my students were shocked to find that I had to take an order on a pad, the number of items each person wanted. While I was bagging it, I had to add it in my head. By the time I got to the counter, I had to glance over at the tax chart and add the amount of the tax in my head to the total that I had. And as I double creased the bag, I told the customer their total. and my students they couldn't believe it because they're not sure, convincing them that they need to have the knowledge minus the technology because things aren't always going to work. Is a challenge sometimes. So for parents, I would say, encouraging their children to do things both ways would be helpful to us as teachers in the classroom because technology isn't 100% all the time.
I think technology will always be here. It's our job as teachers and parents' job as well to teach kids how to use it appropriately.
And also how to be good consumers of available information, that not everything available online is equally reputable and equally valid in terms of, that whether it's a learning resource for their own academics or it's a source of news or information. Our jobs in every area need to include that literacy piece of how do you evaluate the information that you're getting online from the internet in ways that 15 years ago we didn't have to do that. I never thought in my physics class that I would need to have that skill as a teacher to be able to evaluate learning resources or pieces of information that kids have access to 24/7 to see if it's a credible piece of information.
And also just not in terms of using it and what's valid or not, but also using technology in a way that's appropriate for learning and encourages correct learning. I'm a world language teacher, and it's very easy to write something in English and just throw it into a translation program. But you're not going to learn that way. So what we've had to do very often is more of our assessments, like writing assessments, we can't give that as a homework assignment anymore. It has to be done in front of us, and that, right, 20 years ago wasn't as much of a problem. The technology wasn't there. So sometimes the technology is tempting, but not in a way that's going to benefit the student.
Got it. All right. I want to go off. Well, actually, you know what? We're going to start with the spending on class supplies because that's something that somebody mentioned as like that's an eye-opener. I'm going to go to those stats here from the survey just to kind of take a look at what some of these numbers were. All right, the average amount for more than half of you was between $100 and $500 a school year.
Absolutely.
Is that accurate with our group here?
Easily.
Yes.
Easily.
And what are you buying?
Well, for a special ed teacher and you're teaching functional life skills, food, how to cook, how to measure, all the functional things that 18 through 21-year-old might need to go on and move on in their life, the next step. Like today, I could say I could have brought my BJ's slips because we went and made a whole turkey dinner for the kids, which some of them might not even get to have at their own home. So we had turkey. Where did we get that? Oh, I bought that. And the kids were thrilled. You know, my staff made food too. We all brought something to the table. We asked their opinions. We got input. We went shopping for it. So we're buying that stuff out of our own pocket because that's not in the curriculum. That's just something we do, and it, you know, it kind of gives you a family at school, and it's really nice to have that before a holiday. You know, those simple things.
But I mean, what's the solution here? Because I mean, you really shouldn't be on the hook for buying an entire Thanksgiving dinner for your class, you know?
The solution is in funding. That may be seen as something extra, but if we're truly going to reach our students and really prepare them for the real world, these are not extras. I mean, it's everything. I've bought everything from instruments on occasion to papers to pens, shoes,
Belts.
underclothing, you name it. It's over the years, it depends on what the students' needs are. And meeting those, we cannot reach students if their basic needs are not being met. And I don't always think it's a fault of the parent. It's not. I make those same decisions as a parent myself. I've had to decide which needs of my own children I can meet. So it's not for lack of wanting, it's just the world we're in now.
Now, is this more of an issue of getting funded on the state level or on a district level?
I think it's a combination of both.
I think it's
Absolutely both.
Absolutely.
both.
The funding from the state is given and taken away, and the formula that they use has not been correctly
It's convoluted.
applied for years.
Right.
And so, in my district, for example, because we were considered a wealthier district, money's been taken away from us to the point where it's become a real problem in terms of the funding of our public school system.
In my district, I know we don't have paraprofessionals.
Right.
We had those taken away for many of our, even our lower grades, kindergarten, pre-K.
Yeah, I remember, I think like it's the paraprofessionals that are usually like the first to go as
Right.
we've covered these over the past few years. And I think like
They-
2015, 2016, it was really
And then the way that the state money comes to the towns and the boards of education, that then turns around and impacts staffing. So then you're addressing the issue of class sizes and do you have enough school counselors? Do you have enough mental health professionals? Do you have paraprofessional educators available? Do you have extra tutors? Things like that. So when budgets are tight, staffing is usually one of the first line ties to look at.
It's
And
one
to
of the
tie that-
biggest
yeah, go
piece, it's one of the biggest pieces in the budget is your staffing.
Right. Oh, yes, by far,
And that,
if not the
by far,
biggest. Yeah.
I mean, but that's yeah, that funding piece is so important. You buying books and pencils and papers and getting the towns and the state to support us, and that's challenging. And you made a good point where funding is taken away, just like in our district. You know, West Hartford and Newtown are probably very similar, and it really impacts staffing. You know, whether, you know, to go back to mental health and go back to your social workers and your psychologists and your paraprofessionals, and there's not enough to go around, and it's unfortunate because it really impacts the students and their ability to be successful in their schooling.
And over the years, to tie into another question that you had asked before about how education has changed, there's been a lot of task inflation over the years. So it might only be certain things every year. But for example, now that you know, the services have had to be increased for many of our students, right? In West Hartford, we've had a big bump in for student services, and we're a destination location for a lot of these services. And at the same time, we saw our funding being taken away. But because we're doing a good job, more people are moving to places like West Hartford, for example, and the town is having a hard time keeping up with the expenses for all of the programs that many of these children, including for mental health, require.
Michael?
I was going to say, the first 4 years that I was teaching, I received a pink slip every year due to the budget cuts, either in the town or in the state. And so while I love teaching and have a great passion for it, it does make it really difficult to go into the classroom wondering, you know, will I be here next year? Will I get to see these kids continue to grow?
I want to talk about kind of shifting gears now to question 6, where it said, has a student ever threatened you or a fellow student with physical harm? And with you, between yes, I have been threatened, and yes, I have seen a student be threatened, that is well over half of the teachers surveyed. What are some of the experiences that you guys have seen?
Chairs being thrown across the room, you know, that's a typical thing when a student's having a crisis. And then the support for that student to have that crisis. It might not come for a while. You might have to take your class out of the classroom, so that impacts, you know, learning. You know, and that goes back to what he was saying there about services and needing to fund our schools and our services. It all comes down to that, you know, the ability to have that.
I think parents would be really surprised at the number of times their child's classroom has been evacuated.
Yes.
I think a lot of our children at school have become so desensitized to classrooms being ripped apart, threats made against other students or teachers, and when the whole class needs to be evacuated, that it's not even something that's a big enough deal that they think they need to tell their parents. They've just become so accustomed to it.
And how has that shifted, especially, you know, for the veteran teachers here? Have we seen more of these incidents progress or decline or about the same?
Well, we're not really allowed to intervene in any way anymore. We're not supposed to touch the students, and that's just a statement. So I think before, teachers could get more involved in terms of relieving a problem, and now we're not allowed to directly interact. And as you were saying, the classrooms need to be evacuated, and so it's a different way that we need to approach it according to the laws and the stipulations that are put upon us.
As a special ed teacher, I have physical management training, and because of that, I do have to intervene, and I can put, if you have to put your hands on to keep everyone safe. The big part of that is that you want to try to intervene before any of those things happen. So you learn all those nuances of the student and the issues and what they're like, what's going to set them off beforehand, so you don't have to do that. I mean, I have kids that are probably double the size of me in my classroom, so I'm not going to be able to do that much, but if I can get to them, if they're dysregulated beforehand, and bring that down, that's better for everyone, so that nobody has to leave the classroom. Or maybe that kid, you teach them the strategies they need using like a zones of regulation, where that's what we do in our classroom, and that helps all those. But that's because I'm in a RESC, and we do have specific, we have 2 teachers in my room, and 3 staff. So we're and we have 8 kids. So it's a lot different because they're a little more challenging, but we do have those strategies that we're trying to use all the time.
But it also does come down to training and resources again, because certainly every one of us wants to be able to mitigate a situation, de-escalate before it becomes a crisis where you have a physical altercation or you have to clear out a classroom. But it takes resources to train educators well, and a one-off professional learning opportunity where there's 100 people in a room to learn a skill doesn't meet a teacher's needs. And so ongoing training costs money. And
expensive.
And it's expensive. And it is something that is desperately needed, because I think a lot of educators don't feel prepared right now in this day and age to deal with a lot of the issues that students bring to us in our classrooms from the outside community. I think that more issues from home and the community surface in school, and that a lot of educators desperately want more resources and more training, but there's only enough, so much time in a day, and there's only so much from your pot of resources to take from. But I think that that's something that most educators wish that we had more access to in school.
Got it.
I think it comes back again to class size. You're talking about class size, being able to help those students who need to be deregulated, or to catch them before they happen to not be able to use the strategies that you've taught them. It comes down to class size. If you've got a high class size, again, funding, it's a lot harder and more challenging to assist those students before that gets to the point where you've got to evacuate a classroom or
And Kristen, you were talking about the support that you guys are looking for that you guys just don't have right now. What is it going to take? I mean, is it just funding, or in an ideal world, what would you guys like to see to be able to be equipped to handle these mental health episodes, or sometimes even violent episodes?
I think more job-embedded training needs to happen. So again, not a one-off professional learning experience where it's a 3-hour thing on one day after school and then it's never revisited again, but actually having someone available to do coaching and training on an ongoing basis in schools, I think is something that would be of use to a lot of educators.
I see a lot of nods, yeah. So anything else that you guys would be looking for?
I was going to say that I think we need a lot more social workers and psychologists in our school.
Absolutely.
I think, since Sandy Hook and some of those other tragedies, we've seen no additional support in that sense. And teachers, we care about our students, we give our hearts for our students, but we're not trained mental health professionals, and we need more of those professionals in our school to help those kids in need.
Or at least get some training that we're the first responders, or we can figure out the situation and then get the right help.
Correct.
Because at that moment, that kid needs you, and you need to be there for them. And if we don't feel comfortable, it's not helping them. We need to feel comfortable in helping them.
I want to talk bullying, because maybe it kind of goes hand in hand with this conversation. But I think bullying, for the most part, might be a little more discreet in some cases. You know what I mean? Where it might not be as a parent to you guys, where you would be able to intervene. How big of a problem is bullying in school?
I think bullying is a big issue in a lot of schools, and to your point, you were saying bullying is more covert than it ever used to be. 15 years ago, bullying might be much more visible to us as teachers, and we could help those students. Now, bullying takes place on social media, and students might not feel comfortable coming forward to get the help that they need.
Or that we're just not aware of it unless we have a conversation that's a probing conversation with an individual student. And again, that takes time to build a relationship, to build the trust so that I can sense when there's something off with one of my students, but to be able to have that conversation to then find out that the reason why I'm getting this weird vibe of something going on is because of something that has been going on Snapchat or through Twitter. And that is not something that you can't see that in the hallway. You don't see that when the kids are walking into school, but all of a sudden a child's demeanor will change, and it's because something popped up on their screen. And it's serious to them in the moment, and then it completely throws them off for a period of time, and that's something none of us ever had to deal with growing up. So I think that a challenge that so many educators have is just that their experiences right now as teenagers is not something we can directly relate to. And so it's harder to look for signs and signals. And again, that comes back to training, but also being able to build relationships with your students. And again, back to class size, it is easier to build relationships with students when you have 18 or 20 students in a class as opposed to 28 or 30 students in a class. And I'm speaking as a high school teacher.
And earn their trust to the point where they would be able to go to you, say, hey, you know what, I am being bullied, right? So, I mean, what is the solution there?
Well, we have a lot going on in our district now with SEL, social emotional learning, and getting student ambassadors. And again, that goes to training. We just recently had a training in our school where students were taken from classes for 3 days. That can't happen all the time. But it gives them skills to help to intervene, as well as teaching us skills that will help to better our climate, which in turn will give them that safety, that safe place or that safe person to go to that they can report bullying or other issues that they're having too. But everything comes back to the funding and the training, because as you said, we did not. I don't remember ever having anything to do with this in college, being trained. When I came through, it was content, how best to deliver the content, and I'm a performing arts teacher, so it was, and how do you support other subjects through your content?
So this is like, these are the intangibles that school doesn't prepare you for, right?
Now I came through early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, so back then, this was not.
Mr.
It wasn't in the late 90s either.
Mr. McOtter, I would say that if anybody in this room, it would have been you that would have had this training. Was any of that addressed?
We didn't really have a lot of social emotional training when I graduated. I graduated in 2013. So again, I had a great educational experience. I got a lot of time in front of the children, but not really any of this piece. And I think a lot of the times, unfortunately, our school districts are ranked so much on their standardized scores that we can't always take the time to focus on the social emotional learning that we need to, because that won't show up on the test.
Even on the elementary side, you're talking about student ambassadors. We're a little different, where we talk about responsive classroom and morning meetings and helping those kids to build those relationships that they don't get to build on the playground anymore, because they're, screen time off of school, or there's we get out at 4 o'clock, so they don't have that time to play out, outside like we used to, in recess is the same thing, building those, how to deal with those issues on the playground, or even within the classroom, the responsive classroom, the morning meeting, so it's not the ambassador, but you're still trying to develop those community skills that people don't realize you're doing in the classroom, because it's reading, writing, arithmetic, science, social studies, and the numbers that Michael was just referring to. That's what the community's concerned about, because they're like, I want to have a house in a community that has a good school, and good schools are ranked by how well you're doing on a test, and that's the only way to see a good student is not through a test.
Teachers wear 100 hats.
Yeah.
So you're
Absolutely.
a gym teacher, you're a adult, a parent, you're the nurse at any time, the psychologist, the social worker, the cook. So all those times we wear so many hats, and I think it's just gotten we have to wear more hats than I think they used to way back.
That task
Yes,
inflation, right?
right, the task
Every
inflation,
time we have
right.
more
Yep.
things that we need to evaluate the children for, whether it's emotional or academic, but we keep, every year there's 3 or 4 or 5 more things, which in 1 year isn't a lot, but if you take 20 years, as you suggested, it becomes a lot more responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's
And nothing gets removed.
Nothing gets removed.
If they only remove, here's one thing they need to know. If you could only remove one thing, think about that every year. Remove one thing from our plates, and maybe that's a start.
So as we lose funding, as we lose support staff, the responsibilities become greater. And what we really want to do is we want to serve the kids in the best way that we possibly can. And so sometimes I think for a lot of educators that does become frustrating.
Yeah, I'm going to just wrap this up now because, I mean, you guys really touched on so many great points, but I think the thing that we are hearing on the other side, whether it's me, our viewers, parents, your job is a lot harder than a lot of people think, and I think a lot of people give you credit for, between spending your own money, keeping up with the technologies that's ever changing, and dealing with things that, like vaping, Lee, for example. You know, you guys probably had to worry about cigarettes, drinking, all of that, but now we're worrying about vaping on top of all of that. This job is very hard, you know? What do you want these parents to kind of come away with, just from this interview and also this survey as well? Just kind of sum it up, final thoughts.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'd like to say, my cousin who lives down near you in Newtown, right? But now he has a job up here, so he spends a couple of nights a week at my house. And he was really surprised because I come home, I'll do something, I'll have some dinner, and then I'm up in my office. And I'll be working for 2 or 3 hours. I think any teacher who's really worth their weight is doing something like that. You know, so it is, so a lot of people do think, you know, it's 10 months a year and things like that. But as we discussed before, a lot of us are creating curriculum in the summer or have another job in the summer, and we're working most nights. So it is a fairly intensive, I'm always in some ways kind of envious of those people who, when they leave work, they close the door, and that's it. Because for any, as I say, any teacher, any good teacher, you're not doing that.
Do you think parents are naive to the challenges that you guys have?
To a certain extent.
I think for the most part, parents are supportive. Parents
Yes.
like their child's teacher. Parents want their children to have a good relationship with their teacher. But I think unless that parent has worn our shoes, has walked in our shoes, I don't think that they can truly know the struggle that
And the kids
that
are
we deal
never
with every
off
day.
their mind.
No.
Like, I
yes.
wake up in the middle of the night and say, did I do that? And then you're like, oh God, am I going to be able to go back to sleep? And it's like if a kid, you know, say they go in the hospital, you're constantly checking with that parent. And you're like, it's always in the back of your mind, but you're still doing your daily stuff, whether you have it could be your family or what, it's still there in the back of your mind, always present.
I take my kids home with me in my mind all the time.
Yep.
I am constantly thinking about my classroom, my students, my lessons when I drive in the car. School is always on my mind. I think parents are sometimes pleasantly shocked or surprised when they realize that their high schooler is emailing me at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night for homework help or something like that, and I'm answering those emails. And I think that that's maybe something that the general public doesn't realize and doesn't think about how much of our jobs we do take home with us. And that includes caring about your kids.
And I think they also need to know it's not a job to us.
No.
We care as much for their children
okay.
as they do. And that's something I think we need to get out there as well, because that's a really important piece that we really do care for them. We wouldn't do this job if we didn't.
And exactly, that relationship that you often create with your students. Now, in the high school, students who've graduated, we've lost 2 students in 2 years after they've graduated. And the school is turned upside down. People are weeping. You know, these are people, so even though it's a profession to a certain extent, but these are kids who you've had relationships with. And if you have your own children, it's a very similar type of relationship often. So if you lose somebody or something happens to somebody, it's devastating.
I think they need to know that I hope I speak for everyone here that their kids are our kids for life.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, even after they leave the grade that we might have them. I'm a high school teacher now. I have connections with students from way back in the day. And I was able to go back and thank some of my teachers. My 5th grade teacher this past year, and then my senior English teacher. They were so impactful on my own life. And so I still have that connection. So we're in it because we love it. We love their kids, and their kids are ours.
And all of you guys, I'm serious, are a special breed to be able to do this and fight this, what seems like an uphill battle between the funding, between the staffing, between all, you know, keeping up with everything. It's very tough, but I do want to ask you, just by a show of hands, you know, knowing what you know, living what you lived, would you still be a teacher today?
Yes.
All of you?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think that we would want parents to know that we love our students and we would do just about anything for them, but we need more support.
Yep. I think our hearts are always with our children. We always want to do what's best for them. And I think what keeps us up at night and what we, always nags at us is we want to do more. We wish we could give more.
Be able to do the best job you can.
And did I do enough?
Yep.
Right. The kids are what keep me coming back day after day, year after year. It's why I want to stay in the profession for another 10 years and finish out my career as a classroom teacher. That's important to me, and it's the kids that are going to keep me doing that.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for
you.
your time. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. This was very, very insightful.